The Great Hall of Nexus Prime stretched higher than most buildings on smaller worlds. Crystal walls caught the light of 3 artificial suns and threw rainbow patterns across the polished floor. This was where the most powerful beings in the galaxy came to make decisions that affected trillions of lives. Today, the hall buzzed with the usual talk of trade routes and tax increases. Ambassador Zexathara sat in her massive chair that rose 20 feet above the floor. Her green scales gleamed in the bright light, and her yellow eyes looked down at the other council members with barely hidden contempt. She was Vazak, and the Vazak had ruled half the galaxy for 300 years through strength and fear. Her people were born warriors with thick armor-like skin and claws that could tear through steel. Below her, Dr. Kithel clicked his sharp mandibles together in what passed for laughter among his kind. The insect-like Kithara had built an empire on cold logic and endless reproduction. Where one Kithara died, 10 more took its place. His compound eyes reflected the light as he studied data scrolling across his wrist device. The debate today was about the Outer Rim territories and their constant complaints about unfair treatment. The smaller species always whined about something: higher taxes, forced labor, military service for their children. Zexathara found it tiresome. That was when someone mentioned the humans again. Zexathara rolled her eyes and let out a long hiss of annoyance. Every few months some fool brought up the human fairy tale. Usually it was one of the minor species trying to sound important by claiming they had found evidence of the legendary warriors. Dr. Kithel stopped clicking his mandibles and fixed his many eyes on the speaker. It was Ambassador Chendar from the water world of Aquatica. His blue skin had patches of silver that showed his age and wisdom among his people. But wisdom meant nothing when you were talking about myths and legends. Chendar held up a small metal fragment that caught the light. He claimed his researchers had found it in the ruins near the Sol system. The metal was unlike anything they had seen before. It was stronger than Vazak battle armor, but lighter than Kithara bioplastics. The markings on it suggested advanced technology that no current species possessed. Zexathara laughed so hard her chair shook. The sound echoed through the great hall like the roar of some ancient beast. Other council members joined in. The luminary representative glowed brighter with amusement. Even the usually serious Seren delegates allowed themselves small smiles. Humans were stories told to children. Tales of a species that could adapt to any environment and overcome any enemy through cleverness instead of strength. They were supposed to have built amazing machines and traveled between stars faster than anyone thought possible. The stories said they were born weak but made themselves strong through determination and cooperation. Dr. Kithel spoke in his flat mechanical voice that all Kithara used when stating obvious facts. He explained that no species could be as adaptable as the human legends claimed. Evolution did not work that way. A species was either strong like the Vazak or smart like the Kithara, or energy-based like the Luminari. No single species could be good at everything. The stories were clearly made up by weak species who wanted to believe that someone might come to save them from their betters. It was wishful thinking at its most pathetic. If humans had ever existed, they would have been just another primitive species that learned to use fire and build simple tools before going extinct like countless others. Zexathara agreed completely. She had personally led military campaigns against dozens of species over her long career. She had seen how primitives fought when cornered. They were desperate and sometimes clever, but they always broke in the end. No species had ever surprised the Vazak military machine. Far from the Grand Council chambers, in a dusty excavation site on the edge of known space, Dr. Elena Rodriguez wiped sweat from her forehead and looked at the massive structure her team had been uncovering for 6 months. It was clearly a ship, but unlike any design in the current galactic database. The hull was smooth and dark, and their scanners could barely penetrate its surface. Elena was human, though few people knew what that meant anymore. Her grandparents had been among the survivors who escaped when her people disappeared from known space. They had hidden among other species and changed their names and learned new languages, but they had never forgotten who they really were. Captain Jake Morrison landed his cargo ship nearby and walked over to where Elena stood. He was tall and muscular with the kind of scars that came from fighting in too many back-alley conflicts. His business was moving things that governments did not want moved, and asking few questions about why. Jake had agreed to help Elena because she paid well and because something about her story felt familiar. His own family had strange tales about ancestors who came from far away, stories that did not quite match the official histories taught in schools. Elena showed Jake the latest discovery. They had found an access panel hidden beneath centuries of accumulated dust and debris. The symbols around it were not in any language the translation computers recognized, but something about them felt right to Elena, like a half-remembered song from childhood. When Elena touched the panel, it came alive with soft blue light. Lines of text scrolled across the surface in letters that seemed to shift and change as she watched. Jake stepped back nervously, but Elena felt only excitement. This was what she had been searching for all her life. The ship's systems recognized something in Elena's genetic pattern. Ancient security protocols that had waited 3 centuries began to activate. Deep in the vessel's core, an artificial intelligence that had been dormant for longer than most civilizations had existed started to wake up. Back on Nexus Prime, Zex Thara was explaining to the Council why they needed to increase military spending in the outer territories. The smaller species were getting restless again. There had been more protests and some actual attacks on Confederation facilities. Nothing serious, but enough to be annoying. Dr. Kithel supported her proposal. The Cathera had calculated that a show of force now would prevent larger problems later. Better to crush a few rebellions early than deal with organized resistance. The mathematics of oppression were quite clear to his logical mind. None of them noticed the small communication device hidden in the chamber walls. It had been placed there years ago by someone who looked like just another maintenance worker. The device recorded everything and transmitted the data to a location no one would think to look. As the Council voted to send more warships to intimidate the outer colonies, Elena's hand pressed against the ancient access panel. The ship around her began to hum with power that had slept for 300 years. In the depths of space, other ships that had been dark and silent for centuries started receiving activation signals. The fairy tale was about to become real, and the galaxy would never be the same. The cold void of space held secrets that no living being had seen for 300 years. In the shadow of a dead star, massive shapes began to stir. The Oort cloud of this forgotten system had hidden them well. Asteroids and ice chunks drifted past hulls that were longer than most space stations and wider than city blocks. Admiral Sarah Blake felt the gentle vibration as her body began to warm. The cryogenic pod that had been her home for 3 centuries was bringing her back to life. Her enhanced metabolism kicked in and repaired the tiny damage that even the best preservation technology could not prevent. Nanobots in her bloodstream checked every cell and made corrections where needed. Sarah opened her eyes and saw the familiar ceiling of the command ship Endurance. Everything looked exactly as it had when she went to sleep. The designers had built these ships to last, and they had done their job perfectly. She sat up and felt her muscles respond as if she had only been sleeping for a single night instead of 300 years. Around her, other pods were opening. Commander Jack Roberts stretched and yawned as if waking from a normal sleep. Dr. Susan Miller checked her instruments and nodded with satisfaction. Lieutenant Kevin Walsh began running system diagnostics without being asked. The crew of the Hidden Fleet was exactly as they had been when they entered their long sleep. But the galaxy had changed while they slept. Sarah walked to the main display and watched as Adam, the artificial intelligence, began his briefing. Adam had stayed awake during their long exile, gathering information and waiting for the right moment to wake them. His patience had finally been rewarded. The holographic display showed the current state of galactic civilization. The Confederation controlled most of the inhabited systems through a combination of military force and economic pressure. They had divided the galaxy among the 4 major species and treated everyone else as servants or slaves. What interested Sarah most was how complacent they had become. The Vazak military was spread thin across hundreds of systems. The Cathera focused more on reproduction than innovation. The Luminari had grown lazy with easy power. The Seren spent most of their time in pointless political games. Adam showed her detailed analyses of their weaknesses. The Vazak relied on brute strength and simple tactics. The Cathera used overwhelming numbers but poor coordination. The Luminari energy weapons were powerful but predictable. The Serene naval formations followed ancient patterns that had not changed in centuries. More importantly, none of them had improved their technology in the 300 years since humans disappeared. They had grown comfortable with their superiority and stopped trying to innovate. Meanwhile, human technology had been designed to evolve and adapt even while its creators slept. Sarah studied the reports on human survivors scattered across the galaxy. Most lived in hiding, pretending to be other species or keeping to the forgotten corners of space. Some had been enslaved by the Confederation. Others had formed small communities that struggled to survive under alien rule. On the mining world of Kepler-7, Commander Rick Stone had been trying to organize resistance for years. His people worked in dangerous conditions, extracting rare minerals for Vazak weapons. Children were taken from their families and forced into military service. Anyone who complained simply disappeared. Rick had sent message after message into space, hoping that someone would hear and help. The Confederation monitored all communications, but Rick used old human codes that the aliens had never learned to decode. His latest message was more desperate than usual. The Vazak had announced new quotas that were impossible to meet. Back on the archaeological site, Elena Rodriguez watched in amazement as more systems came online throughout the ancient ship. Lights began to glow in corridors that had been dark for centuries. Air circulation systems started working again. The vessel was returning to life. Jake Morrison followed Elena deeper into the ship and tried not to look nervous. He had been in dangerous situations before, but this felt different. The technology around them was clearly far beyond anything the current galaxy could produce. Every surface seemed to respond to their presence in ways he did not understand. Elena found what she was looking for in the ship's central database. Archives of human civilization that had been perfectly preserved. History, science, culture, and most importantly, military records. She learned that her people had not been the primitive species the Confederation claimed. They had been the most advanced civilization the galaxy had ever seen. The record showed that humans had shared their technology freely with other species. They had helped establish trade networks and peaceful cooperation between different worlds. When an ancient threat had emerged from dark space, humans had sacrificed their own worlds to save alien populations. And in return, their grateful allies had turned on them. The moment the external threat was gone, the other species had decided that humans were too dangerous to exist. They had used human technology and human tactics to hunt down the very people who had saved them, but the humans had seen the betrayal coming. The archives showed that the hidden fleet had been prepared in secret during the final years. The best and brightest of humanity had volunteered to sleep in the cold darkness, while their people were hunted to near extinction. They had waited for the right moment to return. Elena found records of weapons that made current military technology look like Stone Age tools, ships that could appear and disappear at will, defenses that adapted to any attack. Most terrifying of all, detailed information about every major alien species and exactly how to defeat them. The humans had not just been preparing to hide, they had been preparing for war. A war that would settle the question of human survival once and for all. Adam's voice echoed through the ship as he established contact with the hidden fleet. The time for hiding was over. Admiral Sarah Blake received Elena's transmission and felt a mixture of joy and sadness. Joy that more humans had survived than they had dared hope. Sadness that the galaxy had become exactly what they had feared it, would become without human influence to moderate the worst impulses of the other species. Sarah looked at the tactical displays, showing Confederation fleet positions throughout the galaxy. Their enemies had made themselves vulnerable through overconfidence and complacency. The time was right for the next phase of the plan that had been 3 centuries in the making. She gave the order that would change everything. Across the hidden fleet, ships that had been silent for 300 years began to move. Engines that used principles the current galaxy had forgotten came online. Weapon systems that had evolved during their long sleep prepared for activation. The fairy tale was becoming a nightmare for those who had created it. But for the oppressed beings scattered across the galaxy, it was about to become their salvation. The humans were coming home and they were bringing justice with them. The first sign that something had changed came when patrol ship Razor's Edge simply vanished from all communications. Admiral Kekstar of the Vazak fleet received the report while eating his morning meal of raw meat and fermented blood wine. His massive head barely looked up from his food as he dismissed the incident as equipment failure. 3 more ships disappeared over the next week. Then 5 ships vanished in a single day. By the end of the month, 17 Confederation vessels had gone missing along the Outer Rim territories. No distress calls, no wreckage, no witnesses. They were simply there one moment and gone the next. Captain Lisa Chen watched the latest Vazak convoy through the sensors of her stealth ship Phantom. The enemy formation looked exactly like every other convoy she had hunted over the past month. 12 cargo ships carrying weapons and supplies for the occupation forces, protected by 4 heavy cruisers and 8 escort fighters. Lisa's ship was invisible to their sensors. Human adaptive camouflage technology bent light and absorbed energy in ways that made detection nearly impossible. The Phantom could hide in open space or blend perfectly with asteroid fields. To enemy eyes, there was nothing there but empty vacuum. Lisa studied the enemy formation and chose her targets. The Vazak always put their strongest ships on the outside and their weakest in the center. They thought like predators protecting a kill, but they never considered that something might be hunting them. She activated the quantum tunnel drive and felt the familiar sensation of reality bending around her ship. The Phantom moved through folded space and emerged directly behind the lead cruiser. Lisa's weapons locked onto the enemy ship's engine core and fired a single precise shot. The Vazak cruiser died without ever knowing what hit it. Human weapons had evolved during their long exile to be more efficient than any current technology. One shot disabled the target's power systems and left the crew unconscious but alive. Lisa preferred capture to killing when possible. Before the other ships could react, the Phantom vanished again and appeared next to an escort fighter. Another precise shot and another disabled ship. Lisa moved through the convoy like a ghost, striking and disappearing before the enemy could even target her position. Admiral Kekstar roared with rage when he received the report. The entire convoy had been captured by a single unknown vessel. The crews were unharmed, but had no memory of what happened after their ships were disabled. Their weapons were missing and their communication systems had been wiped clean. The only clue was a message left in perfect Vazak script on every ship's main display. The words were simple but terrifying in their implications. "You made us myths. Now face the reality." Kekstar had never heard those words before, but something about them made his blood run cold. Similar attacks were happening across Confederation space. Kythera colonies reported that entire populations had vanished overnight. The colonists were found days later on uninhabited worlds with no memory of how they got there. Their equipment was gone, but they were otherwise unharmed. Seren naval bases discovered that their defense systems had been quietly disabled, and their ships moved to different locations. Security recordings showed nothing but empty corridors and vacant parking bays. It was as if invisible hands had rearranged their entire fleet while they slept. The Luminari suffered perhaps the strangest attacks of all. Their energy-based technology simply stopped working in certain areas of space. Power stations that had operated for centuries suddenly went dark. Energy beings found themselves trapped in solid form and helpless to defend themselves. Dr. Martin Webb worked alongside Elena Rodriguez in the archives of the ancient human ship. Martin had been rescued from a Confederation labor camp, where he had spent 10 years mining radioactive materials with his bare hands. His engineering knowledge was helping Elena understand the incredible technology around them. The ship's systems were unlike anything Martin had ever seen. Instead of being built to perform specific functions, they seemed designed to learn and adapt. When Martin tried to understand how the engines worked, the computer sensed his confusion and automatically adjusted its explanations until he could follow along. Elena showed Martin the weapon systems and watched his face go pale. Human military technology had not just been advanced when they disappeared. It had been specifically designed to counter every known alien advantage. Weapons that could drain Luminari energy, armor that could withstand Vazak claws, shields that confused Kythera coordination. But the most terrifying discovery was how the technology had continued to evolve during the 3 centuries of exile. The ship's artificial intelligence had been studying every scrap of information about current alien capabilities and designing new countermeasures. The weapons that emerged from this long development were beyond anything the current galaxy could imagine. On the fortress world of Crimson Station, Captain Amy Foster led her squad of enhanced human soldiers through the ventilation systems of the main command center. Amy and her team wore adaptive armor that changed color and texture to match their surroundings. To Vazak sensors, they were simply part of the architecture. The Vazak had built Crimson Station to be impregnable. Massive walls of reinforced metal surrounded weapons that could destroy entire fleets. Thousands of warriors with natural armor and deadly claws patrolled every corridor. No enemy had ever successfully attacked a Vazak fortress world. Amy's cybernetic enhancements let her move faster than Vazak reflexes could follow. Her teammates had similar modifications that enhanced their strength, speed and coordination beyond normal human limits. But their greatest advantage was not their enhanced abilities. It was their ability to work together as a perfect team. The attack came at dawn when the fortress was changing guard shifts. Amy's team struck simultaneously at 12 critical points throughout the complex. They moved through the Vazak defenses like water flowing around rocks, appearing where they were not expected and vanishing before counterattacks could reach them. General Rex Thor had commanded Crimson Station for 30 years and had never lost a battle. His thick scales had turned aside countless weapons and his claws had torn through the armor of 100 enemies. But when Amy Foster appeared in his command center, he knew immediately that he was facing something beyond his experience. Amy moved like liquid lightning, her enhanced reflexes making her appear to be in 3 places at once. Rex Thor's powerful swipes met only empty air, while her weapons found every weakness in his natural armor. In less than a minute, the most powerful Vazak general in the Outer Territories was unconscious on the floor of his own command center. News of the defeat at Crimson Station spread through Confederation space like wildfire. The impossible had happened. A handful of unknown attackers had captured the most heavily defended fortress in Vazak territory. The psychological impact was even greater than the military victory. On worlds throughout the galaxy, enslaved populations began to whisper about the return of the legendary humans. The fairy tale their masters had mocked was becoming their salvation. Resistance movements that had been crushed for centuries began to organize again. The Confederation had spent 300 years believing they were the strongest forces in the galaxy. Now they were learning that they had been wrong about everything. The humans were not myths or legends. They were predators who had been sleeping, and now they were awake and hungry for justice. The ancient Vazak archives deep beneath the Imperial Palace had been sealed for 3 centuries. Ambassador Zexathara descended the stone steps with growing dread as her claws clicked against the floor. The recent defeats had forced the Confederation leaders to examine records they had hoped never to open. Again, the dusty chambers contained data crystals and metal tablets that told a very different story than the official histories taught in schools. Dr. Keithel's compound eyes reflected the dim light as he read, through files that made his mandibles tremble with what might have been fear or guilt. The truth was worse than any of them had imagined. 300 years ago, the galaxy had faced extinction from creatures that emerged from the space between stars. Ancient beings of pure darkness that consumed entire worlds and left nothing behind but empty void. Every major civilization had been on the edge of complete destruction. The humans had been the first to respond to the crisis. They had shared their most advanced technology freely with every species that asked for help. Human fleets had fought desperate battles to buy time for evacuations. Human scientists had worked day and night to find weaknesses in the ancient enemy. When the final battle came, it was human ships that formed the front lines. Human soldiers who held the defensive positions while alien civilians escaped to safety. Human weapons that finally drove the darkness back to the void where it belonged. The humans had saved everyone and asked for nothing in return. Dr. Paul Grant sat in the ruins of the Cathara research facility where Elena Rodriguez had found him. Paul had spent 30 years gathering these forbidden records in secret. His weathered face showed the cost of learning truths that others wanted to forget. His hands shook as he held documents that proved the greatest crime in galactic history. Paul showed Elena the real records of what happened after the ancient threat was defeated. The grateful alien species had held celebration ceremonies and made grand speeches about eternal friendship with humanity. But in private meetings, their leaders had discussed a different future. The humans were too powerful, they decided. Too advanced, too adaptable, too willing to sacrifice for others. Such a species would always be a threat to the natural order where the strong ruled the weak. The humans had to be eliminated before they became too dangerous to stop. The betrayal had been carefully planned. The aliens waited until human fleets were scattered across the galaxy on rescue missions. They struck simultaneously at human colonies, research stations, and military bases. They used human technology and human tactics to hunt down the very people who had saved them. Admiral Sarah Blake stood in the command center of the Endurance and felt her heart break as she read Paul's research. She had known that her people were betrayed, but the complete scope of the treachery was almost too much to bear. The species they had died to protect had repaid that sacrifice with genocide. Colonel Troy Mason slammed his fist against the tactical display and demanded immediate revenge. Troy had lost his entire family when the human colony of Haven was destroyed. His wife and children had been murdered by aliens who owed their very existence to human sacrifice. He wanted to return that gift with interest. Sarah understood Troy's anger because she felt it too. The humans had the technology to sterilize every world in Confederation space. They could make the alien species extinct in a matter of months. It would be justice for 3 centuries of lies and oppression. But Sarah also remembered why humanity had joined the galactic community in the first place. They had believed in something better than the endless cycle of violence that had plagued the galaxy for millions of years. They had tried to build a future where different species could work together instead of destroying each other. The debate was interrupted by urgent reports from the outer systems. The Confederation had begun deploying planet-killer weapons against human colonies that had never evacuated. 3 worlds had already been turned to ash and radioactive debris. Millions of innocent humans were dead. Captain Diana Price received the evacuation order for New Earth Colony just hours before the Confederation fleets arrived. Diana had been born on New Earth and had spent her whole life protecting the 15 million humans who called it home. She was not about to abandon them without a fight. Diana's defense fleet consisted of 12 ships against 3 full Confederation battle groups. The math was hopeless, but Diana had learned something important during her years in hiding. Sometimes the impossible became possible when you refused to give up. The battle for New Earth began when Admiral Kextar's flagship opened fire on the orbital defense platforms. Diana's ships moved like dancers through the enemy formation, using human speed and agility to avoid the heavy weapons that could destroy them with a single hit. Human weapons had evolved during their long exile to be more efficient than anyone could imagine. Diana's ships fired precise shots that disabled enemy vessels without destroying them. She captured more ships than she lost, turning the enemy's numbers against them. But the real surprise came when the hidden defense systems activated around New Earth. The colonists had spent decades preparing for this day, building weapons and shields using technology that the current galaxy could not understand. The planet itself became a fortress that no enemy could break. Admiral Kextar watched in horror as his massive fleet was systematically dismantled by defenders he had expected to crush easily. His planet-killer weapon charged up for a final desperate shot. But Diana's flagship appeared directly in front of it and fired a single precise beam. The planet-killer exploded in a flash of light that could be seen from 3 systems away. The remaining Confederation ships surrendered rather than face the same fate. Diana had saved her world and proven that human colonies were no longer helpless targets. News of the victory at New Earth spread through both human and alien networks. The Confederation forces began to realize that they were not fighting primitive rebels, but the most advanced military force the galaxy had ever seen. Fear began to replace arrogance in their communications. Sarah Blake faced her greatest decision as reports came in from battlefields across the galaxy. Human forces were winning every engagement, but each victory brought them closer to having the power to commit genocide on a galactic scale. The question was no longer whether they could destroy their enemies, but whether they should. Elena Rodriguez worked frantically to decode the final human archives as the war raged around her. Somewhere in these records was the answer to the question that would determine the future of the galaxy. What had humanity originally intended to become? And was that dream still worth fighting for? The choice would define not just the fate of the current war, but whether the galaxy would finally break free from its cycle of violence or sink deeper into the darkness that had claimed so many civilizations before. The humans had become powerful enough to be gods or demons. Now they had to decide which they wanted to be. The Great Council chambers of Nexus Prime had never seen such fear. Ambassador Zexithara's scales had lost their shine, and her yellow eyes darted nervously around the room. Dr. Keithel's mandibles clicked constantly in a pattern that showed extreme distress. The other Confederation leaders sat in their towering chairs like frightened children, hiding from monsters in the dark. Their mighty fleets were scattered across the galaxy in pieces. Their fortress worlds had fallen one by one to human attackers who moved like ghosts and struck like lightning. Billions of their citizens were in open revolt, inspired by stories of the returning humans. The Confederation that had ruled for 3 centuries was collapsing. The chamber doors opened without any guards announcing visitors. Admiral Sarah Blake walked into the room followed by Captain Jake Morrison, Dr. Elena Rodriguez, and a small team of human soldiers. They moved with quiet confidence, showing no fear of the alien leaders who had once held absolute power over the galaxy. Sarah's uniform was simple, but her presence filled the enormous chamber. She carried no visible weapons, but everyone in the room knew that she commanded forces capable of turning entire star systems into dust. The fairy tale beings they had mocked for 3 centuries now stood before them as living proof of their greatest failure. Zexathara tried to speak with her old authority, but her voice cracked as she demanded to know what the humans wanted. Sarah's answer was simple and terrifying in its calmness. She wanted the same thing the Confederation had been given 3 centuries ago, the choice to surrender with dignity and work toward a better future. Elena stepped forward and activated a holographic display that showed the true scope of human capabilities. Weapons that could crack planets in half, ships that could appear anywhere in the galaxy instantly, defense systems that could protect entire sectors from any attack, technology that made the current Confederation look like children playing with toys. But Sarah also showed them something else. Medical technology that could cure diseases thought incurable, agricultural systems that could feed billions without destroying worlds, energy sources that were clean and unlimited. The humans had not spent 3 centuries just building weapons. They had built solutions to every problem that plagued galactic civilization. Dr. Kithel's logical mind finally grasped the full scope of what they were facing. The humans could destroy them all, but they were offering partnership instead. It was the same choice the humans had been denied when their roles were reversed. The irony was perfect and terrifying. Ambassador Zexathara's pride finally broke under the weight of her people's miscalculation. Her voice was barely a whisper as she asked the question that had haunted her since the first human ships appeared. Why did the humans not simply destroy them all? The Vazak would have shown no mercy to enemies who had betrayed them so completely. Sarah's answer echoed through the chamber and was broadcast to every world in the galaxy. Because you made us into myths, and myths inspire people to be better than they are. We chose to live up to the legend rather than become the nightmare you feared. The silence that followed was broken by the sound of weapons being laid down. Confederation soldiers throughout the galaxy were receiving orders to stand down. The war was over not because one side had defeated the other, but because the victors had chosen mercy over vengeance. The dissolution of the Confederation was swift but not cruel. Each member species was given the choice to join a new galactic republic based on principles of equality and mutual aid, or to withdraw to their home systems and govern themselves. Some chose cooperation, eager to learn from their mistakes. Others retreated in shame to contemplate what they had lost. The Vazak Empire split into dozens of smaller nations as their warrior culture struggled to adapt to a universe where strength was not the only measure of worth. Some Vazak leaders embraced the new order and worked to build something better. Others fled to distant corners of space where they could rule through fear as they always had. The Kithara Collective discovered that their cold logic had led them to make the most illogical decision possible. They had destroyed their greatest allies out of fear and jealousy. Many Kithara devoted themselves to mathematical analysis of their errors, hoping to prevent future generations from making the same mistakes. Elena Rodriguez and Jake Morrison established the Museum of Galactic Truth on the former site of the Confederation Council. The grand chambers that had once echoed with lies and propaganda now displayed the real history of galactic civilization. Visitors from across the galaxy came to learn how fear and hatred had nearly destroyed them all. Dr. Paul Grant worked tirelessly to ensure that future generations would know the complete truth about the past. His archives became the foundation for new schools that taught cooperation instead of conquest. Children who had grown up hearing lies about human fairy tales now learned about the real heroes who had saved the galaxy twice. Captain Lisa Chen and her stealth fleet became the guardians of the new order. They moved through space like protective spirits, ensuring that the mistakes of the past were never repeated. Their ships appeared wherever tyranny tried to take root, reminding would-be dictators that someone was always watching. The rebuilding process took decades, but it was a labor of hope rather than desperation. Worlds that had been strip-mined for resources were restored to their natural beauty. Species that had been enslaved for generations learned to govern themselves again. Trade flowed freely between systems that had once been locked in eternal conflict. Not everything was perfect in the new galaxy. Some conflicts could not be resolved with technology and good intentions. Old hatreds died slowly, and some species never learned to trust again. But for the first time in millions of years, there was real hope that the cycle of violence could be broken. Admiral Sarah Blake eventually retired to New Earth, where she watched human and alien children play together for the first time in 3 centuries. The games they played were different from the war stories their grandparents had told. They imagined futures where different species explored the stars together instead of fighting over them. The fairy tale had ended, but the reality it inspired was just beginning. The humans had proven that even the darkest betrayals could be overcome through determination and hope. They had shown that the choice to be better than your enemies was the most powerful weapon in the universe. Years later, when young beings across the galaxy learned about the Great Return, they struggled to understand how the Confederation could have been so blind. The evidence of human nobility was everywhere if you knew how to look. But perhaps that was the point. The Confederation had needed humans to be myths because the reality of their betrayal was too terrible to acknowledge. In trying to erase the memory of humanity's sacrifice, they had only ensured that when humans returned, they would be measured against legends instead of ordinary expectations, and in that final test, when ultimate power was theirs to abuse, humanity had chosen to prove that some myths deserved to become real. The galaxy was finally free to become what the humans had always believed it could be, a place where different species worked together to build something greater than any of them could achieve alone. The consequence of the Confederation's deeds was not their destruction, but their redemption through the very people they had tried to destroy.